My name is Alan Wiseman, and I'm a writer from the United States. I'm also the author of 2 books published here recently in China, The World Without Us and Countdown. I wrote The World Without Us because I want a world with us, and I wanted to write a book about the environment that people would actually read. Most people don't because they're so frightening to them, or they're so depressing. They're scared that, well, does this mean that we're all going to die? So I came up with an idea of why not just kill everybody off right in the beginning. But my idea was to remove us so people would see that nature can recover with surprising swiftness and restore so much beauty. And for readers to ask themselves, isn't there a way for us to add ourselves back to that picture, only this time in harmony with the rest of nature instead of mortal combat as we seem to be these days? Well, I'm trained as a journalist, not as a scientist, but part of what journalists have to do is talk to all different kinds of people who specialize in various things and put what they know into language that all the rest of us can understand. So I went to many different scientists and said, what would happen if human beings disappeared to this part of science that you study, such as, for example, wildlife biologists or agricultural scientists? Not just scientists. I went to people who lived in various areas where they depended on the land or nature, or even a city. And I said, what would happen if you disappeared? What would happen to your livestock? What would happen to the city that you maintain? And the best example here in Asia is the demilitarized zone between the 2 Koreas. For more than the last half century, an area that's 4 kilometers wide has been a no man's land, and unexpectedly it has reverted into wilderness and become possibly the most important wildlife refuge in all of Asia. At the end of the previous book, The World Without Us, I wanted to talk about how we could have a world with us. But I ran into a very disturbing fact that just kind of stopped me in my tracks. And that is that every 4 to 4.5 days, we add 1 million more people to the planet. And that just did not seem like a reasonable, sustainable number to me. So instead, at the end of that book, I asked, is there something that we should do about this? But finally I decided someone has to look at this as objectively as possible, and since many people were asking me, I guess that had to be me. You know, if you think about it, would we even have environmental problems if there weren't so many of us on this planet? Back when there were fewer people on this planet, there were a lot more species of other living creatures. We are taking up so much of the land to grow food for ourselves. We are using more and more energy to create everything in our civilization. And if you look at the graph of population growth in the 20th century and the graph of CO2 going into the atmosphere, it's the same graph, and that's not a coincidence. That's a good question, because I found out it's so complicated. It's been addressed differently in so many different cultures throughout the world, and so many different cultures have different feelings about it, that I ended up having to go to 21 countries. And then it turns out that the most successful family planning program on earth that brought fertility down even faster than China was a voluntary program in a Muslim country, Iran. So I had to go there, and it's not easy for an American to go to Iran because we don't have diplomatic relations, but somehow I managed to get in. It was the last country I visited, and it's one of the most wonderful stories in the book. You know, throughout much of human history, people died off about as fast as they were born. this happens throughout nature. Infant mortality is extremely high, and human life expectancy up until about 200 years ago averaged 40 years. But then in the 19th century, starting with a vaccine against smallpox, we began to develop all kinds of medical technology. We learned to pasteurize milk. We learned to use hygiene in hospitals and other vaccinations. And gradually our population crept up above 1 billion, then to 1.5 billion by the beginning of the 20th century. And then two enormous things happened in the 20th century. First of all, we learned how to take nitrogen from the air and chemically spread it on the soil. Today, 40% of us would not be here without nitrogen fertilizer. And then in the 1960s, when there were so many people that the world was on the brink of famine, came the Green Revolution, an ingenious way of crossbreeding plants. So every stalk of rice, corn, and wheat would grow shorter and put more energy into developing more grains. You know, the Chinese experiment taught the world a great deal, and the world should be very grateful to China. For one, I mean, quite frankly, as many Chinese scientists told me, if China hadn't done it, there would probably be 400 million more Chinese, and already the ecosystem here and your air and your water are so strained that imagine with nearly 500 million more people. However, the policy also taught us what can go wrong when a government tries to mandate people to only have one child. People get upset, they resist, they try to get around it, then you get officials who sometimes can be corrupt, and you get tragedies of forced abortions, forced sterilizations, discrimination against female babies or female fetuses, so then suddenly you get a disproportionate number of males living in a country. These are all problems that China and some other countries who have tried things like this, like India, parts of India, face in the future. China now is in the process of relaxing this policy. More and more people can have 2 children, and even in the past, about 1/3 of the Chinese had exceptions. They choose to have only 1 or maybe even none. So anything lower than 2, population shrinks. And I think that's where China is at right now. And during my research, when I went to very overpopulated countries, I went to Pakistan, a country where the Green Revolution was first tried out, and people didn't die of famine. And today it has close to 190 million people in a country that is the size of the American state of Texas, which only has 26 million people. Its economy can't possibly employ all these people, so it's a country that's filled with a lot of frustrated, angry, unemployed young men, and it's a country that's in chaos. I saw street battles every day that I was in Pakistan. Pakistan is out of control, and it's a nuclear power. So this is an idea. This gives us a sense of how insecure the world will be. You know, these places become nests of terrorism. It's because a country can't manage the number of its people. I met several visionary economists when I was working on this book who pointed out that economies can't keep growing endlessly on a planet that doesn't grow. They depend on resources, and the products of our economy create waste products that after a while we don't have any place to put them. You know, I come to China. This is such an impressive country. I mean, this is China's century, and it's spectacular, the development that you have. The sky is the limit. Except the sky is the limit because the air over your cities is becoming dangerous. And that's happening in many parts of the world. We can't possibly keep eating up more and more of the planet's resources, and particularly the planet's water, in order to economically develop. Eventually we are just going to collapse. Many economists who I meet in Countdown and readers can meet describe how we can gradually, over a few generations, bring ourselves down to sustainable size so people have enough products to use. And really, it's wonderful when fewer people are born. That means that workers are more valuable, so their wages rise, and everybody likes the idea of getting paid better. And we can have an economically more just world, and ecologically a healthier world.